The marble floors of the Seoul mansion gleamed like frozen tears, reflecting the morning light that streamed through windows taller than most apartments. Kang-won stood in his son's bedroom doorway, watching 8-year-old Hyun-woo arrange his toy cars in perfect silent rows. The boy's world existed without sound, trapped behind a wall of deafness that $50 million had failed to breach. If you're watching from anywhere in the world where families struggle with medical mysteries, you'll understand the desperation that money can't always solve. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because this story of a father's love crosses every border. The latest consultation report lay crumpled on Won's desk downstairs, Dr. Yun's expensive letterhead bearing the same hollow promises. More experimental treatments. More waiting. More watching his son live in isolation while the medical establishment collected their fees and offered nothing but extended timelines. Hyun-woo touched his ear again, that familiar gesture that broke his father's heart daily. The small fingers pressed against the side of his head, as if trying to unlock whatever kept the world's sounds locked away. His mother's voice would never reach him. Won's own words fell into an endless void of silence that no amount of wealth could fill. The boy had learned to read lips with remarkable skill, his dark eyes following every movement with desperate attention. Teachers came and went, specialists rotated through their sterile recommendations, but nothing changed the fundamental truth. Hyun-woo remained trapped in his soundless world, while his father's fortune evaporated into the pockets of doctors who spoke in careful medical terms that meant absolutely nothing. Dr. Yun arrived precisely at 9, his designer suit and polished shoes announcing his success at treating conditions he never actually cured. The man had grown wealthy from Won's desperation, scheduling appointment after appointment, while Hyun-woo's condition remained exactly the same. 8 years of treatments. 8 years of hope, followed by crushing disappointment. We're going to continue this experimental approach, Dr. Yun explained in his practiced tone, hands clasped behind his back as he observed Hyun-woo from across the room. The neural pathways may still develop. These cases require patience and consistent intervention. One wanted to throw the man through the expensive windows. Patience meant more money. Consistent intervention meant more appointments. More bills. More watching his son suffer in silence while medical professionals built their retirement funds on his family's pain. The household staff moved through their routines with mechanical precision, polishing surfaces that already gleamed and arranging flowers that would die and be replaced tomorrow. None of them understood the weight that pressed against one's chest every morning when he watched his son navigate a world designed for hearing children. Hyun-woo had stopped trying to speak months ago. His few words had been unclear, frustrating him until he simply gave up and retreated further into his visual world of gestures and careful observation. One hired speech therapists who departed shaking their heads. Audiologists who recommended more expensive equipment that gathered dust in medical cabinets. The mansion felt like a beautiful tomb, filled with everything money could buy except the one thing that mattered. Hyun-woo's laughter existed only in memory, from before his father understood that silence would define their relationship forever. Now the boy smiled rarely, his joy dimmed by the constant frustration of being unable to connect with the world around him. When the doorbell rang, one barely noticed. More deliveries. More specialists. More people who would take his money and leave his son unchanged. The housekeeper announced the arrival of the new live-in maid, a replacement for the previous woman who had quit without explanation. Staff turnover was constant in a house where hope died slowly and expensively. Adana Okafor stood in the entrance hall with a single worn suitcase, her dark skin contrasting with the pale marble surroundings. Her simple dress and careful posture spoke of someone accustomed to making herself small in wealthy spaces. She studied the opulent surroundings with quiet observation, taking in the sterile perfection that money created when love alone wasn't enough. The head housekeeper spoke to her in clipped tones about duties and expectations, but Adana's attention was drawn upstairs where she could see a small figure moving past the railing. Hyun-woo appeared briefly, his curious eyes meeting hers before he disappeared back into his room. Something in that momentary connection made her pause, though she couldn't yet understand why. Dr. Yun emerged from his consultation, shaking hands with Won while delivering more empty promises about breakthrough treatments and innovative approaches. His words were carefully crafted to maintain hope while managing expectations, the perfect balance that kept wealthy clients paying indefinitely for results that never materialized. Adana watched this interaction from the kitchen doorway, noting the doctor's expensive accessories and Juan's defeated posture. In her village back home, she had seen similar situations where money flowed toward false hope while simple solutions were overlooked. Something about the boy's brief appearance reminded her of her cousin Emeka, though she couldn't yet place the connection. The afternoon settled into the mansion's usual routine of quiet desperation masked by luxury. Hyen-woo remained in his room, Juan retreated to his office, and the staff continued their endless polishing of surfaces that reflected nothing but emptiness. Adana began learning the rhythms of a house where enormous wealth coexisted with profound helplessness. As evening approached, she heard something that made her stop folding laundry. A soft tapping sound, rhythmic and persistent, coming from upstairs. When she investigated, she found Hyen-woo in his bathroom, repeatedly touching his ear while looking in the mirror. The gesture was so familiar it took her breath away, triggering memories of her childhood and a cousin whose silence had been broken by something much simpler than $50 million worth of treatments. But Adana was just the maid, and this was not her place to question the expensive medical establishment that had failed this family for 8 long years. 3 days into her employment, Adana moved through the mansion like a ghost, invisible to the other staff who spoke around her as if she weren't there. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Park, assigned her the most menial tasks while keeping her away from the family's private spaces. Clean the guest bathrooms no one used. Polish silver that remained locked in cabinets. Dust rooms that hadn't been entered in months. But Adana's attention remained fixed on the small sounds from upstairs. That persistent tapping. The soft footsteps pacing back and forth. Sometimes she heard Juan's voice, strained and patient, trying to communicate with his son through gestures and exaggerated lip movements that seemed to exhaust them both. The memory came to her in fragments as she scrubbed marble that already gleamed. Her cousin Emeka at age 6, touching his ear the same way Hyen-woo did. The family had saved for months to take him to the city hospital, where doctors had prescribed expensive drops and hearing aids that accomplished nothing. Emeka had grown more withdrawn, more frustrated, until that day her grandmother decided the medical establishment was missing something obvious. Emeka's cure had cost nothing more than her grandmother's careful fingers and a bowl of warm water. The blockage that emerged had been massive, years of accumulated wax and debris that had stolen his hearing so gradually no one noticed until it was complete. Within hours, Emeka was laughing at sounds he had forgotten existed. The parallel was so obvious it made Adana's hands tremble as she polished the banister. Hyen-woo's constant ear-touching, the way he tilted his head as if trying to clear something stuck inside. The fact that his deafness wasn't from birth but had developed over time, according to whispered conversations she overheard between staff members. But who was she to question $50 million worth of medical expertise? A Nigerian maid with a 6th-grade education and hands scarred from years of domestic work. The other staff already treated her like she was contaminated by poverty, speaking Korean around her while shooting dismissive glances at her simple clothes and worn shoes. Mrs. Park found every opportunity to remind Adana of her place. The family doesn't need interruptions from domestic staff, she said coldly when Adana asked about Hyen-woo's daily schedule. Your job is cleaning, not observing the family's private medical situations. The warning felt like a door slamming shut, but Adana couldn't stop watching when she passed Hyen-woo's room. The boy spent hours at his window, arranging and rearranging toys while pressing his palm against his ear during what appeared to be painful episodes. His world had shrunk to visual patterns and silent games that broke her heart to witness. During her lunch break, Adana found herself in the mansion's library, a room larger than her family's entire house back home. She had learned to read English from missionaries, and the computer in the corner offered her first opportunity to research what she suspected. The symptoms matched perfectly. Impacted cerumen, earwax blockage, simple mechanical obstruction that created complete hearing loss when severe enough. The medical websites described exactly what she remembered from Emeka's case. Gradual hearing loss, ear pain and pressure, the urge to constantly touch or manipulate the affected ear. Treatment was straightforward removal of the blockage, usually accomplished with irrigation or manual extraction. No surgery required. No experimental drugs. No years of expensive appointments. One appeared in the library doorway while she was reading, his expensive suit wrinkled and his hair disheveled from running his hands through it. He looked surprised to find her there, then curious about what held her attention so completely on the computer screen. "I'm sorry, sir," Adana said quickly, minimizing the browser window. "Mrs. Park said I could use the library during breaks." Juan waved away her apology, his exhaustion evident in every gesture. "What were you reading? You seemed very focused." Adana hesitated, knowing she was stepping far beyond her assigned boundaries. "Just learning about hearing problems, sir. My cousin back home had similar issues." Something in Juan's expression shifted, a flicker of desperate hope that he tried to suppress. "The doctors say Hyen Wu's condition is very complex," he said carefully. 8 years of treatment. Many specialists. But what if it's not complex? The words escaped before Adana could stop them. What if it's something simple that's being overlooked because everyone expects it to be complicated? Juan stared at her for a long moment, and Adana realized she had crossed a line that could cost her the job she desperately needed. But something in his eyes wasn't anger. It was the look of a drowning man who had just seen a rope, even if he couldn't quite believe it was real. Dr. Yun returned the next morning for another consultation, his confident demeanor masking what Adana now recognized as deliberate ignorance. She managed to be dusting nearby when he examined Hyen Wu, noting how he avoided looking directly into the boy's ears, instead focusing on expensive equipment that beeped and displayed meaningless numbers. When Dr. Yin spoke about neural development and experimental treatments, Adana couldn't remain silent. "Excuse me, doctor," she said quietly. "Have you checked for simple ear blockage?" The room went silent. Dr. Yin turned toward her with barely concealed irritation, clearly annoyed that a domestic worker had dared to speak during his consultation. Mrs. Park's face flushed with embarrassment at her employee's presumption. "I'm sorry," Dr. Yin said with icy politeness, "but I don't believe we need medical advice from the cleaning staff. Juan, perhaps you could ensure your household employees understand appropriate boundaries." But Juan didn't dismiss her immediately. Instead, he looked between the doctor who had taken his money for 8 years and the maid who had asked a question that somehow felt more relevant than any expensive test. "What kind of ear blockage?" he asked Adana quietly. "The simple kind that happens when wax builds up over years," Adana replied, ignoring Dr. Yun's furious expression. "My cousin had the same symptoms. Couldn't hear anything until my grandmother removed the blockage with warm water and patience." Dr. Yun's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Mr. Kong, surely you're not considering folk medicine over established medical science. Hyen Wu's condition requires sophisticated treatment, not primitive home remedies from uneducated sources." The condescension in his voice made Adana's blood burn, but she kept her expression neutral. She had said what needed saying. Now it was up to Juan to decide whether $50 million of failure was worth more than one woman's simple observation. That evening, as she prepared for bed in her small room adjacent to the kitchen, Adana heard movement upstairs. Juan's voice, softer than usual, speaking to his son. Then Hyen Wu's response, not in words but in frustrated sounds that conveyed his growing desperation with a world that remained stubbornly silent. She thought of Emika, now a healthy teenager whose hearing was perfect after one afternoon of careful attention from someone who cared more about results than reputation. The parallel was so obvious it physically hurt to ignore, but Adana understood her position in this house of marble and money. Tomorrow she would continue cleaning what was already spotless, polishing what already gleamed, and watching a preventable tragedy unfold because she was just the maid and her experience didn't matter to people who measured expertise in dollars rather than outcomes. The breakthrough came during Adana's second week, when she found Hyen Wu sitting alone in the sunroom, tears streaming down his face as he pressed both palms against his ears. Mrs. Park was nowhere in sight, and Juan was locked in his office with business calls that could wait forever as far as Adana was concerned. This child needed someone, and she was the only person available. She approached slowly, remembering how frightened animals responded to sudden movements. Hyen Wu looked up with red-rimmed eyes, surprised to find the new maid crouching beside his chair instead of walking past like everyone else did. Adana smiled and held up her hands, palms facing him, then began a simple finger-counting game she had played with children in her village. 1 finger, 2 fingers, 3. She made exaggerated expressions of surprise and delight each time, watching Hyan Wu's tears slow as curiosity overtook his pain. When she reached 5 fingers, she pointed to him, encouraging him to try. His small hands moved hesitantly, mimicking her gestures while the first genuine smile she had seen from him brightened his face. The game evolved naturally. Adana taught him to spell simple words with his fingers, drawing letters in the air and on surfaces. She showed him how to communicate basic needs through gestures that felt like play rather than the frustrating medical exercises he endured daily. For 20 minutes, Hyan Wu forgot his isolation and connected with another human being through the universal language of patient attention. When Wan found them together, Adana expected immediate dismissal. Instead, he stood in the doorway watching his son laugh silently at something she had drawn on the fogged glass of the window. The boy's face held more joy than Wan had seen in months, and the sight stopped him completely. His child was communicating, really communicating, with someone who had been in their house for less than 2 weeks. He's very bright, Adana said softly, not wanting to break the spell of Hyan Wu's happiness. He understands everything. He just needs different ways to share what he knows. One stepped into the room carefully, as if sudden movements might shatter this fragile moment of connection. How did you learn to communicate with him? He asked, genuine curiosity replacing his usual defeated exhaustion. Children are children everywhere, sir, Adana replied, helping Hyan Wu trace his name on the glass. They want to be seen and understood. The language doesn't matter as much as the patience. That evening, when the household had settled into its usual quiet routine, Adana returned to the library computer to continue her research. The medical articles confirmed what her grandmother's wisdom had taught her years ago. Impacted cerumen was one of the most overlooked causes of hearing loss, especially in children whose ear canals were smaller and more easily blocked. The symptoms matched Hyan Wu's condition perfectly. Gradual hearing loss that parents attributed to selective listening or developmental delays. Ear pain that came in waves. The constant urge to manipulate the affected ear. Most telling of all, the condition often worsened over years as the blockage compacted and hardened, making removal more difficult but never impossible. She found case studies of children who had lived with complete hearing loss for years before simple ear irrigation restored their hearing immediately. No surgery, no experimental drugs, no months of recovery, just careful removal of the obstruction that had stolen their connection to the world's sounds. The parallel to Emika's experience was so exact it made her hands shake as she read. Her cousin had been 6 when her grandmother finally decided the expensive doctors were missing something obvious. The procedure had taken less than an hour, performed in their kitchen with warm water, a syringe from the village clinic, and gentle persistence that prioritized results over reputation. Emika's blockage had been massive, years of accumulated debris that emerged in pieces until the final plug released, and his hearing returned like sunrise after endless night. Within hours, he was identifying sounds he had forgotten existed. Within days, he was speaking clearly again, his vocabulary expanding rapidly as he reconnected with the auditory world. Adana printed the relevant medical articles, hiding them in her room where Mrs. Park wouldn't discover her unauthorized research. The information felt like carrying fire, dangerous and precious in equal measure. She had the knowledge to help Hyan Wu, but no authority to act on it. The next morning brought Dr. Yun's scheduled visit, and Adana made sure to be cleaning nearby when he examined Hyan Wu. She watched him perform the same superficial checks, avoiding any direct examination of the boy's ear canals, while focusing on expensive equipment that measured everything except what mattered most. The neural pathways are still developing, Dr. Yun explained to Wan with practiced confidence. These experimental sound therapies may stimulate dormant connections. We must continue to be patient with the process. Adana couldn't stop herself from speaking. Doctor, have you actually looked inside his ears recently? Not with machines, but with a simple otoscope? Dr. Yun's expression hardened at her continued interference. As I've explained before, this case is far more complex than simple mechanical issues. Hyan Wu's condition requires sophisticated intervention, not amateur guesswork from unqualified personnel. But what if the sophisticated approach is wrong? Adana pressed, knowing she was risking everything but unable to watch this charade continue. What if 8 years of treatment failed because everyone was looking for complicated problems when the solution is simple? Juan's eyes moved between the doctor who had taken his fortune and the maid who kept asking questions that somehow made more sense than 8 years of medical expertise. Dr. Yun gathered his equipment with obvious irritation, clearly planning to recommend that Juan control his domestic staff more effectively. After the doctor left, Juan found Adana in the kitchen, preparing Hyen Wu's lunch with the special attention she gave everything connected to the boy. "They need to talk," he said quietly, and she followed him to his office where the walls were lined with medical reports that represented millions of dollars and no progress whatsoever. "Tell me about your cousin," Juan said without preamble. "Everything. How long was he deaf? What doctors said? How he was cured?" Adana told him everything. Emika's gradual hearing loss that doctors attributed to developmental delays. The expensive specialists who recommended hearing aids and speech therapy that accomplished nothing. Her grandmother's decision to ignore medical authority and trust her own observations about what seemed wrong. The removal procedure had been simple but required patience and steady hands. Warm water irrigation followed by careful manual extraction when the softened blockage began to emerge. No anesthesia needed. No surgical instruments. Just gentle persistence until the obstruction that had stolen Emika's hearing finally released. "He could hear immediately?" Juan asked, desperate hope warring with years of disappointment. "Immediately," Adana confirmed. "He cried when he heard my grandmother's voice calling his name. Within a week, he was speaking better than before he lost his hearing. The blockage had been stealing his words along with sounds." That night, Adana called her family from her room, speaking in hushed Igbo while the household slept. She described Hyen Wu's situation and her growing certainty that his condition was treatable. Her mother listened carefully before offering the advice Adana both expected and feared. "If you can help that child, you must help him," her mother said firmly. "Money and medical degrees mean nothing if they cannot see what is obvious. Your grandmother's wisdom saved Emika. Perhaps it can save this boy too." "But I could lose my job," Adana whispered into the phone. "They could call the police. Say I hurt him. And if you do nothing," her mother replied, "you will lose something more important than a job. You will lose the chance to give a child back his hearing and his happiness. Some risks are worth taking when innocent lives are at stake." The conversation ended with Adana staring at the ceiling, knowing she stood at a crossroads that would define not just her future, but Hyen Wu's entire life. She possessed the knowledge and experience to help him, but using it meant challenging a medical establishment that had built its reputation on his continued suffering. In the room above, she could hear the soft sounds of Hyen Wu pacing in his sleep, his small hands probably touching his ears even in dreams. Tomorrow would bring another day of watching him exist in silence, while the solution waited for someone brave enough to act on simple truth instead of expensive lies. The choice was becoming clear, even if the consequences remained terrifying. Some children were worth risking everything for, and Hyen Wu was definitely one of them. The screaming started at 2 in the morning, piercing through the mansion's perfect silence like a knife through silk. Adana woke instantly in her small room, recognizing the sound of a child in genuine agony. Hyen Wu's cries weren't the normal fussing she occasionally heard, but something desperate and terrifying that spoke of real pain. She found Juan in the hallway outside his son's room, still in his business clothes from working late, his face gray with panic as he watched Hyen Wu claw at his ears while tears streamed down his face. The boy was beyond comfort, writhing on his bed while pressing his palms against the sides of his head as if trying to push out some terrible pressure. "Call Dr. Yun," Juan said without looking at Adana, his voice cracking with helplessness. "Tell him it's an emergency. Tell him to come now." Adana made the call while Juan tried unsuccessfully to calm his son, whose pain seemed to be escalating with each passing minute. Hyen Wu's small fingers scratched at his ears with increasing desperation, leaving red marks on his skin as he tried to reach whatever was causing his agony. No child should suffer like this, especially when the solution might be within reach. Dr. Yun arrived 40 minutes later, his hair perfectly styled despite the emergency call. carrying his expensive medical bag like a shield of authority. He examined Hyen-woo with the same superficial attention he always used, checking vitals and reflexes while avoiding any direct inspection of the boy's ears. Severe ear pain is common with his condition, Dr. Yun explained with practiced calm, preparing a syringe of strong painkillers. The neural inflammation causes periodic episodes. This medication will provide relief, but we may need to consider more aggressive pain management protocols going forward. Won accepted the explanation because he had no choice, watching helplessly as his son received an injection that would mask symptoms without addressing their cause. The painkillers worked quickly, reducing Hyen-woo's screams to whimpers before finally allowing him to fall into an exhausted sleep that felt more like unconsciousness. But what if it's not neural inflammation? Adana asked quietly, knowing she was overstepping boundaries again, but unable to stay silent while watching unnecessary suffering. What if he's in pain because something is physically blocking his ears and causing pressure? Dr. Yin turned toward her with barely controlled fury, his professional mask slipping to reveal the irritation beneath. I've explained repeatedly that this case is complex and requires specialized knowledge. Your amateur theories are not only incorrect, but potentially dangerous. 1. I strongly recommend restricting your domestic staff from interfering with medical matters. One looked between them, torn between 8 years of expensive failure and one woman's persistent questions that somehow made sense. He's suffered through these episodes before, he said slowly. But tonight seemed worse than usual. That's exactly what happens when ear blockages worsen over time, Adana replied, meeting Dr. Yun's angry stare without flinching. The pressure builds until it becomes unbearable. Pain medication just masks what's happening, but the blockage keeps growing until someone removes it. Dr. Yun's laugh was sharp and dismissive. Mr. Kong, if you're seriously considering medical advice from uneducated domestic help over trained specialists, perhaps you should reconsider your priorities. Hyen-woo's condition is documented and established. Home remedies and folk medicine will not cure what requires sophisticated treatment. After the doctor left with promises to adjust Hyen-woo's pain medication schedule, one sat beside his son's bed watching him sleep fitfully under the influence of drugs that solved nothing. Adana remained nearby, cleaning supplies forgotten as she observed the child's continued discomfort even while unconscious. His small hands still moved toward his ears, seeking relief that medication couldn't provide. I can't watch this anymore, one said finally, his voice breaking with 8 years of accumulated desperation. $50 million, and my son still suffers like this. Every month brings new promises, new treatments, new reasons to wait while he lives in pain and silence. Adana moved closer, her decision crystallizing as she watched Hyen-woo's peaceful face marred by lingering traces of agony. Sir, she said quietly, I know you barely know me, and I know this sounds impossible, but I think I can help him tonight. Wan's head snapped toward her, hope and skepticism warring in his expression. Help him how? He asked, though something in his voice suggested he was ready to try anything. The same way my grandmother helped my cousin, Adana replied, her heart pounding as she committed to the most dangerous decision of her life. Warm water irrigation to soften whatever is blocking his ears, then gentle manual removal. It's not complicated, but it requires steady hands and patience. One stared at her for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what she was suggesting. You're talking about performing a medical procedure without training or authorization. If something goes wrong, if you hurt him somehow, we could both face serious consequences. And if I do nothing, Adana said firmly, he'll wake up in pain again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. Dr. Yun will prescribe stronger medications while the real problem gets worse. How long are you willing to watch your son suffer while doctors get rich from his condition? The question hung between them like a challenge, forcing Wan to confront 8 years of failure disguised as sophisticated medical care. His son had gotten worse under professional treatment, not better. Maybe it was time to trust someone who cared more about results than reputation. What do you need? Wan asked quietly, crossing a line that would change everything for both of them. Adana felt a surge of terrified determination as she moved toward the bathroom, gathering supplies while her mind raced through the procedure she had watched her grandmother perform years ago. Warm water, not hot. Clean towels. a small syringe or bulb for irrigation, tweezers for extraction if manual removal wasn't sufficient. Most importantly, gentle persistence and unwavering focus on the child's welfare. She prepared everything carefully, remembering her grandmother's steady hands and patient approach. Emika had been frightened initially, but the relief that followed made the temporary discomfort worthwhile. Hyen-woo deserved the same chance at freedom from his silent prison, even if helping him meant risking everything she had worked for. Won held his son gently while Adana began the irrigation process, using warm water to soften whatever had accumulated in Hyen-woo's ear canal over years of neglect. The boy stirred but remained drowsy from the painkillers, which actually made the procedure easier by reducing his anxiety about what was happening. The first irrigation brought out small pieces of hardened wax, dark fragments that had been blocking sound transmission for who knew how long. Adana worked methodically, alternating between irrigation and gentle manual extraction, following the same careful process that had restored her cousin's hearing. As the blockage began to emerge in larger pieces, Won's breathing became shallow with anticipation and terror. This could work, or it could be the mistake that destroyed his relationship with his son forever. But watching Adana's steady hands and remembering Hyen-woo's earlier screams, he knew they had to try. The breakthrough came suddenly. A large, dark mass emerged from Hyen-woo's ear, followed by a rush of liquid and smaller debris that had been trapped behind the primary obstruction. The amount of accumulated material was shocking, years of wax and dirt that had created an impenetrable barrier between the boy and his world. Hyen-woo's eyes opened suddenly, his expression confused and alert in a way one hadn't seen in years. The child's head turned toward sounds that had been invisible to him for so long, his face showing wonder as he began to hear his father's voice calling his name with desperate hope and overwhelming love. The first sound Hyen-woo heard clearly was his father's voice saying his name, and the wonder that spread across his small face was worth every risk Adana had taken. The boy's eyes went wide with amazement as he turned toward Won, really hearing him for what felt like the first time in his memory. 8 years of silence shattered in a single moment of connection that transformed everything. "Papa," Hyen-woo whispered, his voice rusty from disuse but clear and strong. The word came out perfectly pronounced, as if his ability to speak had been waiting behind the blockage all along. Won's tears came immediately, years of grief and frustration pouring out as he gathered his son into his arms. Adana stepped back from the bed, her hands shaking from exhaustion and relief as she watched the reunion she had made possible. The procedure had worked exactly as it had with Emika, removing years of accumulated debris that had stolen this child's connection to the world. Simple mechanical removal of a simple mechanical problem, despite what $50 million worth of specialists had claimed. Hyen-woo looked around the room with fascination, his head turning toward every small sound that had been invisible to him for so long. The hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic from the street below, his father's breathing. All of it reached him now with crystal clarity that made him laugh with pure joy. "Can you hear everything now?" Won asked, his voice thick with emotion as he held his son close. Hyen-woo nodded eagerly, then looked past his father toward Adana with gratitude that needed no translation. "Thank you," the boy said carefully in English, the words coming slowly but clearly as he focused on pronunciation. "Thank you for helping me hear Papa again." The moment was interrupted by Dr. Yun's arrival, his face dark with fury as he surveyed the scene. One had called him immediately after Hyen-woo's hearing returned, demanding answers about 8 years of failed treatment that had apparently missed the obvious solution. What exactly happened here? Dr. Yun demanded, his professional composure cracking as he realized his authority was being challenged. "I specifically warned against unauthorized medical procedures. If this child has been harmed by amateur intervention, there will be serious legal consequences." "He wasn't harmed," one said firmly, his arm protective around Hyen-woo, who was listening to their conversation with obvious delight at being able to follow along. "He was cured, in one night, by someone who cared more about results than maintaining a profitable treatment schedule." Dr. Yun's face flushed red at the accusation, but he maintained his dismissive tone. "Temporary improvement is not uncommon with these cases. The condition will likely return, possibly worse than before." Proper medical protocols exist for good reasons. But Adana had anticipated this response, pulling out her phone to dial the number she had found during her research. Seoul National University Hospital, she said when the call connected. I need to speak with Dr. Kim in the audiology department. This is regarding an emergency consultation about impacted cerumen removal. Dr. Yun tried to interrupt, but Won silenced him with a gesture while Adana described Hyun Woo's case to the independent specialist. The conversation was brief and definitive, confirming exactly what she had suspected from the beginning. Dr. Kim agrees to see Hyun Woo this morning for verification, Adana reported after ending the call. He says impacted cerumen can cause complete hearing loss for years if not properly addressed. He also says the removal procedure I described is standard treatment that any competent audiologist should have recognized and performed immediately. The accusation hung in the air like a blade, cutting through 8 years of expensive lies and medical theater. Dr. Yun's face went pale as he realized his carefully constructed fiction was collapsing around him. Won's voice was deadly quiet when he spoke. 8 years, he said slowly. 8 years of appointments and treatments and experimental procedures. 8 years of watching my son suffer in silence while you collected fees for doing nothing. Explain to me why you never checked for something this basic. Dr. Yun's composure finally cracked completely under the weight of his exposure. The pharmaceutical partnerships required extended treatment protocols, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The research grants, the equipment contracts, the conference presentations. Simple ear blockage doesn't generate the kind of revenue that justifies state-of-the-art medical facilities. The confession hit Won like a physical blow, years of desperate hope and crushing disappointment suddenly making sense in the most horrible way possible. You kept my son deaf for money, he said, each word carrying the weight of paternal fury that had been building for 8 years. You made him suffer, made me suffer, because curing him quickly wouldn't have been profitable enough. Hyun Woo listened to this exchange with growing understanding, his new hearing allowing him to follow the conversation that revealed the depth of betrayal that had shaped his childhood. The boy moved closer to Adana, instinctively recognizing that she had been his advocate when no one else would challenge the medical establishment. Dr. Yun gathered his equipment with shaking hands, his career and reputation crumbling as the truth emerged. I'll expect full payment for all services rendered, he said with desperate defiance, trying to maintain some authority in a situation that had completely escaped his control. Won's laugh was bitter and sharp. You'll be lucky if I don't have you arrested for medical fraud and child endangerment. Get out of my house, and if you ever come near my family again, I'll make sure every medical board in the country knows exactly what you did to my son. After Dr. Yun left in disgrace, Won turned his attention to the woman who had accomplished in one night what $50 million couldn't achieve in 8 years. Adana stood quietly beside Hyun Woo's bed, her simple dress and worn shoes contrasting sharply with the luxury surrounding her, but her dignity and courage making her the most impressive person in the room. How can I ever repay you? Won asked, his voice breaking with gratitude that went beyond words. You gave me back my son's hearing, his happiness, his future. Everything I thought was lost forever. Adana smiled softly, her hand resting gently on Hyun Woo's shoulder as the boy leaned against her with complete trust. You don't owe me anything, sir, she said quietly. Children should be able to hear their parents' voices. That's not something that requires payment. But Won saw something deeper in her gentle care for his son, something that went beyond professional duty or even basic compassion. This woman had risked everything she owned to help a child who wasn't her own, challenging medical authority with nothing but love and determination to guide her. The morning light streaming through the windows illuminated the three of them like a family portrait, father and son reunited through the courage of someone who had become more than just the maid. Hyun Woo's laughter filled the room as he discovered new sounds every moment, his joy infectious and pure as he experienced his world with senses finally unblocked. Dr. Kim's examination later that morning confirmed everything Adana had known from the beginning. Severe impacted cerumen, easily removed with proper technique and attention. No neural damage. No complex medical issues. Just years of accumulated wax that any first-year audiology student should have identified and treated immediately. The independent specialist was appalled by Dr. Yun's negligence, especially when one showed him the massive blockage that Adana had extracted. This should have been removed years ago, Dr. Kim said with professional disgust. The amount of unnecessary suffering this child endured is unconscionable. As they returned home with medical confirmation of Hyen Woo's complete recovery, one realized that his life had been transformed by someone he had barely noticed 2 weeks earlier. Adana had seen what trained specialists missed, cared when professionals remained indifferent, and acted when educated experts chose profitable inaction. Mama Adana, Hyen Woo said suddenly as they entered the mansion, using the title naturally as if it had always belonged to her. Can you teach me more words now that I can hear them properly? The simple request hit both adults like lightning, revealing the family structure that had formed organically around shared crisis and mutual care. One looked at Adana with new eyes, seeing not just the woman who had saved his son, but the person who had somehow become essential to their happiness in ways that went far beyond medical intervention. Some miracles, he realized, came disguised as ordinary people who possessed extraordinary courage when children needed protection. And some families were created not through blood or marriage, but through crisis that revealed the bonds that really mattered when everything else fell away. 3 weeks after Hyen Woo's hearing returned, the medical board's investigation into Dr. Yun revealed a conspiracy that reached far beyond one family's suffering. The pharmaceutical companies had been paying specialists across Seoul to prolong treatments for conditions that could be cured quickly and inexpensively. Dozens of children had been kept deaf, dozens of families bankrupted, all to maintain revenue streams that depended on permanent disability. Wan's testimony became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case, his detailed records of 8 years and $50 million in unnecessary treatments providing undeniable evidence of systematic fraud. Dr. Yun faced criminal charges for medical malpractice, while the pharmaceutical executives who had orchestrated the scheme were arrested for conspiracy and child endangerment. But the legal victory felt secondary to the transformation happening within their home. Hyen Woo's language development exploded once he could hear properly, his vocabulary expanding daily as he made up for years of lost learning. Adana spent hours teaching him Korean words alongside Igbo phrases, creating a linguistic bridge between cultures that delighted him endlessly. Mama Adana, teach me how to say beautiful in Igbo, Hyen Woo requested one morning as they sat together in the sunroom where she had first comforted him. His pronunciation was improving rapidly, and he loved collecting words in both languages like treasures. MMA, Adana replied, demonstrating the pronunciation carefully. But you are already beautiful in any language, my sweet boy. Juan watched these interactions from the doorway, his heart expanding every time his son used the maternal title that had emerged naturally from their bond. Adana had become more than Hyen Woo's savior. She was his mother in every way that mattered, offering the patient love and cultural richness that had been missing from their lives. The media attention surrounding the medical fraud case brought reporters to their door, eager to interview the Nigerian Maid who had accomplished what Seoul's best specialists couldn't. Adana handled the publicity with grace and dignity, using every interview to advocate for other families who might be suffering from similar medical negligence. There are children all over the world living in silence because doctors assume complex problems when simple solutions exist, she told the television cameras. Parents should trust their instincts when something feels wrong, especially when expensive treatments aren't working. Her advocacy work connected them with families across Korea and beyond who had been trapped in similar cycles of profitable medical care that solved nothing. Adana became an unofficial consultant, helping parents navigate the healthcare system while demanding actual results instead of extended treatment schedules. But Wan's feelings for her had evolved far beyond gratitude for Hyen Woo's recovery. He found himself watching her gentle interactions with his son, admiring her quiet strength and unwavering moral compass. She had risked everything to help them, and her presence had transformed their house from a sterile monument to wealth into an actual home filled with laughter and love. One evening, as they tucked Hyen Woo into bed after a day filled with new words and discoveries, Wan realized he couldn't imagine their lives without her. She had become essential not just to his son's happiness, but to his own sense of completeness as well. Adana, he said quietly after Hyen Woo had fallen asleep. We need to talk about your future here. About our future. She looked up from organizing Hyen Wu's books, her expression careful but hopeful. I know my employment situation is temporary, sir. I understand if you need someone with more formal qualifications now that Hyen Wu is hearing again. One step closer, his voice gentle but firm. I'm not talking about employment, Adana. I'm talking about family. About making official what already exists in our hearts. Her breath caught as she understood what he was offering, the magnitude of the change from domestic worker to potential life partner. But what about the differences between us? She asked quietly. Your social position, my background, what people will say. People will say that a woman saved my son when the medical establishment failed him, Juan replied without hesitation. They'll say that love transcends social boundaries when it's real and worth fighting for. They'll say that Hyen Wu deserves a mother who loves him enough to risk everything for his welfare. The proposal came naturally, not as a grand gesture, but as a simple acknowledgement of what had already grown between them. One offered not just marriage, but genuine partnership, respect for her wisdom, and appreciation for the cultural richness she brought to their family. Their wedding 3 months later combined Korean and Nigerian traditions in a celebration that delighted Hyen Wu and honored both their backgrounds. The boy served as ring bearer, his face glowing with happiness as he watched his father marry the woman who had become his beloved mama through courage and love rather than biology. The ceremony was small but meaningful, attended by family members who had flown in from Nigeria and Seoul society figures who had come to respect Adana's intelligence and dignity. The medical board sent representatives, acknowledging her role in exposing the fraud that had affected hundreds of families. Dr. Kim, the audiologist who had confirmed Hyen Wu's recovery, spoke about the importance of questioning medical authority when treatments weren't working. Sometimes the most important expertise comes from love and careful observation rather than expensive equipment and prestigious degrees, he told the gathered guests. But the most moving moment came when Hyen Wu stood to make his own speech, his clear voice carrying easily through the room as he thanked Adana for giving him back his hearing and Juan for choosing the best possible mother for their family. Mama Adana taught me that courage means helping people even when it's scary, the 8-year-old said with perfect pronunciation. She made me brave too, so now I can help other children who can't hear properly. The applause was thunderous, recognition for a family forged through crisis and strengthened by mutual respect and love. Juan looked at his bride and realized that Hyen Wu's deafness, terrible as it had led them to the person who completed their family in ways he never could have imagined. Their honeymoon was spent not on exotic beaches, but visiting hospitals across Asia, where Adana consulted on pediatric hearing cases while Juan funded equipment and training for proper ear examinations. They turned their personal experience into a mission to prevent other families from enduring years of unnecessary suffering. Adana's formal medical education began the following year, with Juan supporting her enrollment in nursing school, where her natural compassion could be enhanced with professional training. She excelled in pediatric audiology, becoming an expert in the very field where medical arrogance had almost cost Hyen Wu his hearing permanently. The scholarship foundation they established together provided free hearing assessments for children whose families couldn't afford proper medical care. Adana personally supervised each case, ensuring that simple problems received simple solutions instead of profitable, prolonged treatments. Hyen Wu thrived in his new life, becoming fluent in Korean, English, and Igbo while developing into a confident child who advocated for other kids with hearing difficulties. His story inspired documentary films and medical textbooks about the importance of thorough examination over expensive assumptions. 5 years later, as they celebrated Hyen Wu's 13th birthday in their home filled with the sounds of multiple languages and cultures blending together, one reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed. What began as employment had evolved into the deepest love he had ever known, built on shared values and mutual respect that transcended every social barrier. Adana was no longer the humble maid who had risked everything to help a suffering child. She was Dr. Adana Kong, pediatric audiologist and advocate for children's healthcare rights, whose courage had transformed not just their family, but medical practices across multiple countries. And Hyen Wu was no longer the isolated deaf boy living in frustrated silence. He was a multilingual teenager who volunteered at hospitals, helping other children navigate hearing loss, while serving as living proof that simple problems sometimes require simple solutions when someone cares enough to look past expensive complications. Their story had become a reminder that love often arrives disguised as ordinary people who possess extraordinary courage when children need protection. Sometimes the most important miracles happen when someone decides that a child's welfare matters more than job security, social position, or medical authority. What started as a desperate father's search for hope had become a family united by the understanding that real expertise comes not from expensive degrees, but from the willingness to act when love demands courage, and children deserve better than the systems designed to profit from their suffering. Looking at this story of unexpected love and miraculous healing, I'm curious about your own experiences with questioning authority when something felt wrong. Have you ever had to choose between following rules and doing what seemed right for someone you cared about? Share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the most ordinary people create the most extraordinary changes when love gives them the courage to act.